Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. Derek, we are all over the place this weekend. We started in Toronto, then we head to Toulouse for the sevens, then we're down in Montevideo for the under-20s. There's just so much going on. How are you able to keep up with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Obviously, real big sevens tournament from both Canadian teams this weekend, and everything else happened. The Saracens are into the Premiership final, which is always delightful to it feels like we're back at kind of like the rightful place after a couple of years there. And then, yeah, obviously a big Arrows game on Friday night, a little Friday night lights happening, the sweet cracked ice jerseys. I do still feel like I owe you a significant apology for spilling a Dr. Pepper all over you up in the press box prior to the game. At least the jerseys are kind of water resistant though, but I still feel like I need to apologize. And I also have to apologize to my laptop and all my equipment that got absolutely drenched by that Dr. Pepper that was sitting there for like 25 minutes before I tried to open it. So I still don't know what happened, but
terrible. Just pay for the Tide Pod and I'm sure my wash jersey will be all the better in time for next game, which will be on this coming Thursday on the 18th. Yeah. But that's getting ahead of myself. Let's focus on the game itself. So Atlanta, Toronto, Atlanta currently had, going into this game, a 5-1 record against the Arrows. The Arrows, for lack of a better term, had pretty much sacked the season off. And the starting lineup, had a few interesting decisions being made, like Brody on the bench. I think a lot of people were surprised to see that. But, obviously, with the list of injuries going on, player management was all important. So that gave Will Grant his first start for the club. Similarly, Tyler Wong started as hooker with Ramon Ayaza on the bench coming in later into the game. It started off kind of what we were thinking. Atlanta getting the jump pretty early on. They get the lead. And even though it's Toronto's ground, everything kept piling up. Penalties against the Arrows kept coming up. And sooner enough, we have the Atlanta, the away party, having a 17-0 lead by the first hydration break. And by the first 30 minutes, they, still had that advantage. And then came a bit of kicking activity going on because Arrows had it, kicked it to Atlanta. Atlanta kicked it back, and then Shane O'Leary takes the ball, spiral kicks it, and it's one of those kicks where everything just goes right when you need it to go. So O'Leary kicks it up, spirals in the air, it hangs tight. He's running forward, and it bounces back off an ATL number 10. And then the fullback looks as though he's about to have it, but he accidentally knocks it on right into the hands of Avery Oiterman. The Oiterman Empire is back as he gets his first try of the season at home. And, it just, great to see Oiterman obviously scoring, but, just being in the right place at the right time, getting that ball, getting the momentum back into Toronto, back behind Toronto, and first score, that duck's broken. So we then get the 7 points because O'Leary gets the conversion. So we get to close out the half, and it's coming up to 10-17. So within a score of the second half. Then we have Lalani Faleva getting an intercept, making a run. Unfortunately, the speed just isn't there, but the Arrow support is passing the ball outwards. Eventually ends up in the hands of Mitch Richardson, who runs in under the post for the 7-point try. And suddenly the game is all tied up and everything's looking peachy clean. The arrows aren't out of it, and we always say like the first score after halftime can really dictate how the match goes. However, Atlanta remembered that they were Atlanta, and they were like, right, we want to get into the playoffs, so we need to start scoring quickly. And barely a few minutes after Richardson scored that try after the restart, it was another Canadian, but Jack Shaw from Atlanta scoring for ATL. And then 3 minutes after that, Biddle gets over for the bonus point for Atlanta. So, we've had this kind of thing of like, oh, the arrows fall off after, 60 minutes. And then it's a whitewash until the end. Maybe I was 10 minutes late with that estimation, but because obviously those tries happened at the 50th minute. But then when the 60th minute does roll around, and we do get these bench players coming on. So we have Kobe Faust coming on around about the hour mark, Ayaza coming in as well. And Ross Brody did come in at the 52nd minute mark, but 10 minutes later, due to some incredible plays that just everything seems to start working again. And like I said, Kobe Faust, one of those players. And oh yeah, Tazi is also back from injury. He's off the bench and he's in. He came in a lot earlier actually due to an injury to Noel Reed. So he managed to get a full game without expecting it, pretty much. But his work from Richardson to Tarsi to Faust. Faust gets along on the touchline. He's drawing in the players, and then he offloads to Brody, who is the top try scorer this season, and he gets it over the whitewash. And in so, O'Leary steps up for another conversion, and he nails that one as well. And then it gets worse again because Isaac Salmon, who had just come on, gets a yellow card for, and seeing it look like a shoulder charge, and I was thinking like, Salmon's really lucky not to have a red card. That was just from my angle. I was seeing it from the other side. Were you able to get a good view from the press box for that incident?
Was my view that significantly farther away better than yours? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a yellow. It's a shoulder charge. It's a yellow.
Yeah, I think the only mitigating factor was the player was already coming down anyway, so it would have been difficult to wrap around anyway. But the referee said 10 minutes in the bin, and Talapusi was able to do a quick penalty to get it over, and suddenly it's a 10-point advantage again. So a player down. It's already past the hour mark. You expect, seen in the past few games, this is where the Arrows just lose it, but not this time. So Mason Flesh made a smart play. He scooped up the loose ball at the breakdown, and then it got cycled out, eventually ending up in the hands of Deshaun Bowen, who earlier in the game had butchered a clear try-scoring opportunity, but wasn't allowing that to happen again. And then he takes the ball, crosses the touchline, gets under the post, 7-pointer. And then as we finally get into the dying minutes of the game, there is a penalty for the Arrows. And there's a choice of, do you go for the corner or do you go for the post? And the Arrows decided to go for the post, tied up the game. There was still time left on the clock to continue. And to be fair, the Arrows did plan to go for that attacking phase. Unfortunately, right at the end, Mason Flesh just pushed into touch. The game tied at 34-all for the first tie of the season, and I think it was mentioned like the 6th tie in MLR history. So
not too many of them.
So not a win, unfortunately, but not a loss as well. Lots of positives to take away. And yeah, so the stats of this game. Do you want to take us away with the big calls of the night and who put in the most effort and carries and tackles?
Sure, I could do that. Yeah, well, I think you're forgetting that James Dealey's not on this podcast, bud. Even though I know you must have got used to listening to him on it.
I know, but you keep bringing up things like carries made, tackles made,
I
and
mean, that's important. So, I mean, obviously, so really, I think kind of a couple stats that really do jump out at me, was definitely the two guys that had were playing in their 50th caps. So you had Travis Larson and Lucas Rumball, who were I thought absolutely incredible. So Larson had 22 tackles, Rumball had 19, and neither one of them missed one. So
yeah,
which
excellent.
is that's phenomenal. Obviously, they were a huge presence in the in the breakdown as well. Rumball and Flesh, I thought were great at the breakdown in this game, especially. They had that one, the one steal. They kind of combined for a little steal. On the play that Lolani Falivia had a huge run on, and then and then that ended up being Richardson's try. So that was created off the work in the breakdown from Rumball and Flesh there. So Rumball was, constantly doing his typical excellent self. One of those 19 tackles that he had too was on Nail Saunders at the end of the first half that basically prevented a try. Well, not basically prevented a try, that did prevent a try. Right. So Rumball, Larson as a whole, and then Larson obviously had a led the team in carry meters, I believe, too. He had 108 meters carried. So he just kind of kept racking up the stats. So I think like when I'm looking at some of the arrow stats in this game right now, I'm like that to me is the one that those are kind of the ones that stand out the most to me. It's just like the guys in the 50th caps, right, put in massive performances. They both like Larson was led the team on the attacking breakdown arrivals, Rumball in defending breakdown arrivals, right? So it's like two veteran players, guys playing in a milestone game, and then they absolutely brought it in this one, which I'm excited, which I was excited about. Yeah, so like a couple of the other big stats, I think one of those things too that a couple players that you did mention too, to Talatasi Tassi, he was back in the lineup. Unfortunately, as you did mention, Noel Reed suffered an injury real early in this game. So Tassi had to come in super early, and he was one of the leaders in the tackles as well. He was up there with Lucas Rumball, as well as his midfield partner in Mitch Richardson was also up there in tackles. Also, Richardson also, according to the Major League Rugby too, was also the second in the team in meters with 89. So Tassie, Richardson both getting it done on both sides of the ball. Richardson obviously scored to go with all of his tackles. Richardson obviously scored a try, had a ton of meters, and then, as you kind of mentioned, Tassie had an absolutely highlight reel pass in the build up to Brody's try. So they were all kind of factored in massive games too. I think the other one of the other performances in this game too that I thought was really good was Mason Flesh. I know that the game kind of ended on a bit of a mistake by Flesh, as he stepped into touch. And that's unfortunate. You got to know where you are on the field, right? You got to know where you are, where you are positioned, where your feet are, right? So it's like that. I would have liked to maybe see the Arrows get a little bit more of a run at picking up the win toward the end of the game there. But despite that, like I don't think that should take away for how good Flesh was in this game. I kind of already mentioned his contributions at the breakdown, but he came away with a couple pretty big line out steals in this game too. And he was I thought he was phenomenal in this game. It's probably one of his best games that he's played this year. I think to me he looks a lot more comfortable at lock. And maybe that's just like kind of like an Arrows personnel thing. If you can get Rumball and O'Neill out on the flanks, it kind of opens up Flesh to be just a lock. And I think he seems like he's a little bit more suited to be playing in the middle of the field and then kind of let Rumball and O'Neill kind of roam around and go where they're needed. But so I think that's kind of been working out so far. Those are the guys that stood out to me, at least from Toronto. Obviously, really nice to see Oideman get his first try since 2019. Bowen added another try, his first since his hat trick game. Right. So obviously that's great to see. Luani Faliva continues to probably be one of the best players on the team throughout the year, always makes an impact. On the other side of the ball, again, Jack Shaw, Matt Heaton both scored a try. Canadians love playing the Toronto Arrows, man. Just absolutely love playing the Toronto Arrows. And even the commentary thought that Seth Purdy also scored a try. It ended up being Rowita Biddle, but there was a brief moment where it was like, if you just looked at the game sheet, it would say that 3 Canadians scored a try. So even players that wear the jerseys of Canadian players score tries when they play the Toronto Arrows. So it's kind of interesting how that's working out. But I don't know, anybody that I missed, Stu, anybody that's kind of stood out to you or you want to touch on? A couple storylines in this game that we could probably get back to.
Yeah, I think again, other side of the pitch, I think Matt Heaton continuing to prove his captain capabilities. Because I know someone, I think it was Brian Ray, pointed out is that for the first half of the season, Heaton was like co-captain, and then for the second half of the season, he's now been like returned to like the captain role, in which the ref approaches him and explains the issues with ATL. So, excellent quality, and obviously Jack Shaw, fantastic as well. I think of the Arrows players that were able to play, I mean, the injury list still is pretty long. We still have Davis, Goodall, Malcolm, Thomas still on that injury list, and hoping that they recover well and get well soon. But Tyler Wong, I think he did very well, especially for his first start. And the scrum was kind of good. I will say that the driving maul at the line out is something that will definitely need to be worked on between now and the start of next season, really, because there was multiple instances where the Arrows could have scored a try from that, but every single opportunity either resulted in a penalty to the Arrows that they then went for the driving maul again, or it was a turnover that resulted in a scrum to ATL. So that was very disappointing.
Yeah, there was that one moment of the match that I believe it was still 17-0 at this point, but Nelson hit a really nice 50-22. And it was like a deep 50-22, like maybe like 5 to 10 meters out from the Atlanta line. And it's the exact situation that you described, right? They had a chance for a line out to push a driving maul over. It didn't work the first time. It didn't work the second time, and it didn't work the third time either. Granted, the reason they had 3 attempts at it, was that Atlanta was taking penalties. So maybe if they kept taking penalties, maybe you start to maybe 1 or 2 more, maybe that would have been penalty try kind of territory for the Arrows. But unfortunately, it didn't go that way because it ended with a turnover and Atlanta got the ball back and were able to clear their lines. So like that was obviously that's obviously been kind of an issue. I think though that in knowing though that moment happened in this game, and also the moment too where as you alluded to earlier, Deshaun Bowen dropped a sure try, like the clearest 7-point try that he would have scored, but unfortunately he dropped it, right? And I think that stuff like that happening early in the game, I think, is exactly why I actually really liked this game from the Toronto Arrows, because it's some of those things that we've talked about there, all year, right? They're one of the lowest try scoring teams in the league. And every game they play, they seem to be plagued by a little bit of inability to finish, right? And those 2 events both happened early in this game with the team kind of already down like 17-0. So you're already off to a really bad start. And the thing that I do kind of really like about this game though is that and so we did a post-match interview with Mitch Richardson after, and he kind of also pointed it out that usually the thing that's been plaguing the Toronto Arrows is that they have a really good first 60 and then they fall off in the last 20. Whereas this game was they had a really bad first 20 and then increasingly got better as the game went on, and then had a really nice comeback in the final 20, even though they were also down a man. Right. So they were able to over the one thing, right, that so it's like as Richardson kind of pointed out, they got in this game, like they got better as the game went on. Right.
Yeah.
Which hasn't been a thing that's happened at all this year. And another thing too, that like if you go back and listen to a few of our post-match videos on Rouge Rugby YouTube and on rougerugby.ca, right? One of the things that like Rumball has been kind of saying that the team's been doing too is like when somebody makes a mistake, it just piles up. When there's a mistake, it's compounded, errors get compounded, right? It's like, okay, you give up one penalty, but now all of a sudden you give up one penalty, now you've given up 3 penalties. You knocked on, sure, maybe you dropped the ball, you knocked on, but just because you knock on, that doesn't mean you have to give up a penalty in the next scrum. Like things just keep piling on, especially when they get behind. And the great thing about this game, I think, is that they didn't do any of that, right? And it's, they get down 17-0 early. They maybe fall into some of the things that have plagued them early this year, such as an inability to finish, right? As we've mentioned. And then, but they still battle back. They get a really nice break on that O'Leary spiral kick that Oideman was able to convert into a try. And then they clawed back. They had a Richardson try, O'Leary getting some penalties. They tie the game 17-17. And then, oh no, they do the exact same thing. Right. Atlanta comes back, and now Atlanta goes back up by would they go back up by 17 again? Right.
14.
Oh, they got up by 14, and then okay. Yeah, so they get up by 14 again, and then they end up. So they get up by 14 again, and then Toronto comes back. Atlanta pulls ahead again. So there's a late penalty there. Toronto once again comes back, right? And ultimately, that kind of, it compounded in like one of like the better performances, or a performance that the team can feel a lot better about, because I think some of those mistakes that we've been talking about all year that happen still happen in this game, but what feels like for the first time all year, really battled back and battled through them all, and were able to come away with the draw, with 3 points in the standings, right? Which ultimately is a pretty good result. And we kind of mentioned a handful of players that played really well in this game. They were good at the breakdown. The scrum was good. The line out, especially defending the line out, Flesh had. Like they had their best game at like stealing lineouts and disrupting Atlanta's lineout in this game, or disrupting an opponent's lineout all season in this game. And Atlanta's got a really good lineout typically, right? So that's a bit of a rarity for them to kind of see balls being stolen or overthrows and stuff happening. So I think like if you're Peter Smith, if you're Lucas Rumball, if you're the Arrows as a whole, I think there's a lot more positivity that you can definitely take from this game. Just based on the fact that, maybe some of those errors still happened. And going forward, you want to eliminate those errors. You shouldn't need 3 shots out of a line out 5 meters out to score. You should, you know what I mean? Like Deshaun Boland should not drop that ball. Right.
Yeah.
But and I'll stick with Deshaun Boland, but what you like is that it's like, he dropped that ball, he made a mistake, but he kept battling and playing through it and scored a try, which would ultimately lead to the Arrows tying the game later, right? Like everybody, instead of like, I'm not sure if you can necessarily call it a complete 80-minute game, because the first 20 was pretty bad. They got down 17-0 real fast. But like the fact that they were all able to like kind of stick with it and battle through, not just falling down 17, but also falling down 14. There's 2 comebacks in this game, right? Which is something that I'm not sure the Arrows have really. That's not a thing that the Arrows have shown at all this season, right? Like, I mean, we saw a few games ago, right, against the Free Jacks, they got down early and like they could never recover, or the game against Utah, which was pretty even until Utah got a two possession lead basically, and then they completely fell apart in the end of that game, right? But this game they were able to get behind and keep battling and clawed their way back, not once but twice, right? And that's that's obviously a lot of positive things and something I think that the team can build on going forward for the rest of the season, as what they should be doing is continue to try to ruin people's years. Didn't really work out this week though because of the draw against Atlanta. So Atlanta got 3 points because they got the two for the draw plus the one for the bonus point, and they actually moved up in the standings despite the Arrows' best efforts there. But I'm sure a couple teams' years will be ruined still.
Mm. Well, okay. So another talking point is going for the penalty
Right.
at the end instead of going for the corner. Now, because I know they did the same thing against Dallas and they went for the corner, and Dallas held out to get their first ever victory in MLR.
Yeah.
So with that knowledge of what had previously happened, as well as the failed driving maul from earlier in the game, failed driving mauls, plural.
Yeah.
I think that considering that information and the fact that they have been on a 3 game losing streak at home so far this season, just getting the points, just finishing even, just to say it wasn't a loss, was something that I think the guys needed. And so you can argue, yeah, if the season's a toss up and you're already focusing on next year, does this game really matter? Like you can, go for the driving maul, but I think just having that breaking the losing streak, having something that isn't a loss on your record, I think that's the boost that maybe some of the guys needed. So I think that going for the post is okay. But what are your thoughts on it?
So my initial thought when that penalty happened was they should kick to the corner. You got one win all year. There's not really a lot to lose. And yeah, I think I think you try it. I think you try to win the game outright. To me though, it's like when the Dallas game happened, we were talking about how it's like I was talking about how like I would much rather have like the group of players that would try to win the game in that situation than the group that would just settle for the tie. That would just settle for the tie when they were playing the Jackals. There is though I think a massive difference in the two situations, in that the penalty in the Dallas Jackal game, that was going to be the last play of the game. There was going to be nothing coming back from that. You were deciding if you were going to go for a tie or the win. That was going to be the last play. Whether you kick it or you try to go to the corner, that was going to be the last play of the game. The big difference in this situation to me is that this penalty is with 3 minutes left. Right. And obviously in rugby, when you score, you get the ball back. So I think the big difference in the situation to me is I don't think the players are looking at the situation and thinking the same way that you are here, Stu. I think I don't think they're looking at it as like, let's go for a tie. I think they're looking at, let's tie the game up, get the ball back and win. Which is a completely different situation than the one against Dallas. If there was no time left on the clock when O'Leary had that penalty, I don't think I would like it. I think you try to win. I think with 3 minutes left on the clock, there's enough time to try to win that game.
Yeah.
Because you get the ball back. Unfortunately, they didn't really get the ball back, and they actually ended up having to defend pretty well as Atlanta attacked their line, but they held that off. And then a couple Atlanta penalties moved them up the pitch really quickly, to the point where at the end of the game they were in an attacking opportunity with a chance to win the game. Unfortunately, they ended up going into touch, and that ended the game there. But I don't think that mindset is necessarily we're playing for a tie. I think their mindset there, which is a big difference from the Dallas game, is there's time left. We can tie this game, get the ball back, and go down and win. Didn't work out that way, but I think that's more of what they're going for here.
Hmm.
I still say years, like as many weeks as it's been later, I think they made the right call against Dallas, even though they lost, because I think like you got to try to win the game. Um, I think they're still trying to win this game. I don't think they're trying to settle for a tie.
Well, that's it. I'm not saying they're settling for the tie. I said they're not losing.
That's settling for a tie. You're trying to win. You're not trying to not lose. You're trying to win, right? I think they're trying to win the game.
Yeah, but I think if you're losing like what was that, 7 games in a row at that point, then anything but a lot. It's the whole thing from Shorzy and Letterkenny is like, you may not. Some people don't love to win, but some people hate to lose, and definitely losing at home for 3 games of the season, including the worst defeat in MLR history. Sometimes you just need something else. And yeah, as in so it can be both. As in like, look, we kick for post, we go again, and if we're not fortunate enough, then we still have the draw.
Yeah, but
so
that's exactly what I'm saying though, is that's a completely different situation than the Dallas game. Because
but that's the thing. I'm not saying it's the Dallas game. I'm saying as well is that the history from the Dallas game is like, okay, it didn't work then, but the situation was different. However, during this same game, you had multiple chances of the driving line out 5 meters away, and it didn't work. So stick with what your kicker has already scored to what another infield kick set up the first try. So, put the trust in the kicker and then put trust in yourselves to go again.
Yeah. I think Mitch Richardson had a little bit of a Shorzy-esque quote in the post-match too. He was kind of saying it's like you're just he did mention that the team is just sick of losing at this point.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like it shows. It's like in like their mannerisms and stuff after the game. It's like they're not happy with the way that the season's gone and everything, right? And it's nobody likes to lose. I don't think it's it's obviously it's a step in the right direction. That was probably the most positive game that they've played, right? There's a lot there's a lot of positives to take away from that. Like even like you said, like those mistakes that you're even talking about, like the lineouts and stuff that they had tried to like push over, and it's like that was still when the game was 17-0, right? And it's like they hit the first half hydration break and completely turned their game around, and were able to pull in like a complete performance and claw back and win or draw a game that 20 minutes into the game looked like they were not in at all. So I think that's kind of the big positive for it. I think so. I mean, I still think I maybe would have tried to just go win the game out right there. I maybe still would have tried to kick to the corner. But I understand the idea that there's time left on the clock to get the ball back and go and try to win the game again. And they got close to it. So I don't mind that.
In the end, that's all she wrote. That was the first, I think it's the first draw of MLR this season. And we've said as well, like the cracked ice jerseys, I think with the black shorts as well, works fantastically. And, those have been bid on. The bids, unfortunately, now closed, but you can see the Arrows again this Thursday, where they will be taking on Old Glory DC. And if everything has worked out well, then you are listening to this the morning of that game. So we'll know what the lineup is, and hopefully we'll be getting that Arrows home win for the first time this season. Anyway, let's move on to the other games of MLR round 13. So, because the Arrows and ATL were the first game of the round, the next one is NOLA versus San Diego. And, no surprise, San Diego dominating the West, which is already a very tough conference this year. NOLA, they put in a bit of fight, but eventually San Diego just ran away with it. The final score, NOLA 12, San Diego 26.
How good is having Michael Smith back in this league?
Oh, so good. And except for the part where San Diego have yet to play the Arrows, so that means the Arrows have to play.
Yeah, that goes back to my Canadians always score against Toronto. Mike Smith might have a hat trick in that game. I don't know the way he's playing right now. Yeah, he's returned from medical school and just hit the ground absolutely running. He scored a try in this game. San Diego gave him their Player of the Match award. He's got 2 tries in 2 games, or back-to-back games now. And I think he's only started 2 of them. It's his 3rd game, right?
Yeah.
I think he only started 2 of them. Yeah, phenomenal from Mike Smith.
Yeah. And then we go to the first of our all Western affairs, as it is Dallas versus Utah. And, Utah got off the blocks incredibly well, had the try bonus point, by the 30th minute mark. And then kind of, did the classic thing of, we're leading. We've got such a strong lead. We can relax a bit. We can, drop our focus. And then Dallas came back into the game. However, Utah were able to hold out and deny Dallas a losing bonus point. Final score, Dallas 26, Utah 36.
Emerson Pryor and on McLeod's first try, too.
Yeah, just seeing a couple of Canadians bouncing around the league and getting some start. Still waiting on that all-Canadian front row, Dallas. You need to get on it, and then you can get the second win of the season. I mean, it's just science. The more Canadians you have playing at the same time, the more likely you are to win.
Yeah, look at New England.
How it is. Exactly.
Don't look at Toronto. Look at New England.
Yeah, Toronto's the exception to the rule. So it applies to all the American teams it applies to. Anyway, the second all-Western affair was Houston versus Seattle. This is basically the battle for who is going to host the Western Eliminator. And, a very tight affair to begin with, but then Seattle just took the reins and went away with it. Disappointing, I think, for Houston not to have had more of an impact, especially on the scoreboard, because that is what matters at the end of the game. They'll be kicking themselves. The final score, Houston 17, Seattle 34. Now we go from all West to all East as DC hosted New England. And, New England, they have yet to lose to an Eastern Conference team this season, and that just was continuing. Setting up a big marker by halftime. DC was able to get a few scores on the board, but New England were already too far away to be caught. Final score, DC 24, New England 42. And now we have, Chicago versus New York. And on paper, after everything that's been happening this season, Chicago looked like they would be dominated. They'd be, left in the dust. I mean, we've had 2 games already this weekend that had more than a 20-point differential. And then we have Chicago decided just to put everything on the line, and they were storming away. And then within the final few minutes, New York were able to get 2 tries and get it converted. Chicago 20, New York 21. The final play of the game, a kick within range between the posts, and Luke Carty steps up. He had been 100% at this point. He kicks the ball. The crowd starts cheering, and the ball hits the upright. Bounces down into New York hands. They kick it dead the final score, Chicago 20, New York 21. And with that heartbreaking loss, Chicago become the second team to be eliminated from the playoffs after Dallas. Did you? I saw the final 15 minutes of that game, and it was
wild.
so it was like great for a neutral to
Yeah.
just be like supporting along. But if you're a Hounds fan, oh my word,
I was
pain,
I was
misery.
yeah,
Don't come close to how you feel after this. Goodness.
I was just cheering for chaos in the Eastern Conference. If New York loses this game and then you got like Atlanta moving up with a draw, yeah, this I was just cheering for chaos in the Eastern Conference really at this point. I think though the other thing, like New York wins this game, dude, we have got to talk about Andrew Coe and how just he's the best player in MLR right now. He is on absolute fire. Um, he's got so in his last 7 games, he's got 7 tries. The only game he hasn't scored a try in is the game that they were shut out by New England, the 8-0 loss to New England. He got 2 the week after against NOLA to make up for it. He has in the last 7 games, he has gone from having no tries to being 5th in Major League Rugby in tries. He has significantly closed the gap on Hadding, on Augsburger, on Balakenya. He has just been absolutely tearing defenses apart over the past 7 games. And yeah, he's at like I mean he's obviously played. He had a bit of a slow start to the season, but ever since the game against Atlanta after their bye week, he's come out and just an absolute torrent try pace. And New York too, and like the try in this game, New York's really using that, like having him swing off the wing off set piece plays, whether that's a line out or a scrum. And like I'm not sure when teams are going to start picking up on this, but New York is scoring a lot with this play. And I mean I'm sure they are picking up on it. But it's and probably a lot easier said than done to actually stop it. But Andrew Coe's having a lot of success just kind of running through the middle of the field off set piece plays, man. And
yeah,
it's been absolutely unreal this year.
To be honest, speaking of other Canadians in this game, it's good to see Quinn Nawadi back after what seemed to be like a spell on the injury list. Yeah. And Lindsay Stevens came in for Mason Coe at around like the 50-minute mark and, showed like proper leadership qualities in the forwards pack. Great to see. And yeah, as in, congratulations to New York on getting the win. But your heart aches for Chicago. This was a game that most people have written off prior to it starting, and then they were leading for a huge portion of it. And
yeah, that's definitely going to be a game, especially with the kick at the end that Chicago can look at, be like, we should have won this game. Toronto has had a lot of those games, as we have discussed on the podcast. Unfortunately, should have won is not the same as did win. Should have won, could have won. Doesn't really matter unless you do actually win. Right. So it's tough, but I mean that's one of those things that I guess Chicago's gonna have to learn, which something I didn't really think they would have to learn considering what the bulk of their roster was made out of. But yeah, it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, we move from MLR onto the World 7 Series as both the men's and women's was taking part in Toulouse for the French Sevens. For the women, this was the final leg of the journey. For the men's, the penultimate one. So let's start with the women. Canada started out in the pool stages with a 1926 loss to the USA, followed by a 35-7 win over Poland, and then concluded with a 28-7 loss to New Zealand. In the 9th place playoff, they won their first game, a 26-17 win over Brazil, before a final close loss, 14-15 to Spain. So they finished 10th in Toulouse, and overall for the entire season, they finished 9th. Now, on to the men. They were also had New Zealand in their pool stages, and that was a 29-12 loss to Canada. But they followed up with a 26-0 win over Uruguay, and then did another with a 33-7 win over Kenya. And so they got into the Cup quarterfinals for the first time this season. And the weekend that knockout round started well with a 12-10 win over Australia. And then reality unfortunately settled in as they lost to Argentina 33-5 before concluding for the bronze medal match with a 28-12 loss to host France. So they finished 4th, which is the highest that they have finished for the entire season up to this point. So
hell of a time too.
Yeah, excellent timing, guys. If you could have just done that a little bit earlier, maybe you wouldn't be in the elimination playoff next week in London.
Yeah, no,
but
but great momentum builder going into. Obviously, they have to play. They got who else is in this? Kenya, Uruguay,
and Uruguay. So these are teams that they have already beaten this weekend. But let me put this into context. That Canada scored 15 points in the in the overall tables in Toulouse. So they scored 15 points over, if I'm just getting my calculations correct. Yeah, the last 7 rounds of competition, they have scored 15 points.
So yeah, there you go.
So
I mean, if you obviously, with the format change of the 7 series, as you said, they have to play in like a promotion relegation round next week. So you obviously have to perform huge next week because that's going to have a massive impact. You want to stay up in the series. And yeah, man, really no better time to get a nice confidence building round than this week. Right. It's like everybody was clicking. The attack looked good. Defense looked good. Yeah, man, huge win over Australia. Right. And yeah, you finished 4th, but like, that's phenomenal. Right. That's, significant. It's your best performance of the year at the time where you need your best performance of the year. So hopefully it's a lot of momentum that they can keep building into next weekend.
Well, wishing the guys all the best in that competition. And, hopefully it ends up with Canada being the 12th team next season. But they are currently, as I said, 14th and in that playoff round. More details will be announced on the World Rugby 7 Series website. And speaking of Rugby Canada, we now moving back into 15s, kind of, as we talk about the U20s men's results, as we were interviewing Corey Hector last week. We now have the results from those fixtures. Unfortunately, both losses. First of all, was a 21-16 loss to Uruguay under 20s men, and a 21-9 loss to Spain's under 20s men as well. But valuable experience that these guys can pick up. As Corey mentioned, the under-20s will be facing off against the Arrows Senior Academy before they take part in that series against the USA to qualify for the under-20s World Trophy. And news that has come out today on Monday, May 15th, is that Stephen Aboud has been appointed as High Performance Director for Rugby Canada, a position that has not been occupied since 2015. For those that don't know, Aboud had a 26-year career with Irish Rugby Football Union, serving in many roles and helped create the IRFU's Academy program, as well as designing coaching courses and mentoring coaches at all levels. And he's been spending the last 7 or so years with the Italian Rugby Federation, where he served as head of technical direction for the development of players and coaches. And he has been overseeing the establishment of Italy's robust U17 to U20 structures and academies. And if anyone has been following with the under 26 nations for the past few years, you'll see how far in leaps and bounds that the Italy under 20 squad has come along. And a lot of those players that were playing when Aboud first took over are now playing for Italy in the Italy for the Six Nations and for international duty, and probably be there at the World Cup. So, I think this is a great acquisition. He said in his press release, "I am honoured to take up this role with Rugby Canada and would like to thank CEO Nathan Bromvis and the board for the confidence and support they have shown me. I would especially like to thank my new colleagues for their warm welcome and selfless assistance with my introduction over the last few weeks. From our initial conversation together, I'm convinced we have the determination and passion to further develop quality systems and pathways to make Canadians proud of their rugby and proud of the players who represent Rugby Canada. Aboud will officially commence his role as the High Performance Director, which will focus on not only the men's and women's program, but the 15s and 7s as well. He will begin in June 2023. So, a big name, a lot of history there. A lot of skill as well. I think he said, I think it's on his LinkedIn profile, he has a quote, coaching rugby is easy, but coaching it well is not so easy.
Yeah, anything is easy. Doing things well is what comes in a little bit harder. I love this this signing. This seems like it Aboud seems like the exact type of person that, or at least the resume that's coming in seems like the exact type of thing Rugby Canada needs. Like his career highlights kind of including like developing like the IRFU's academy program, work with like the Italy's under 20s. It's in all honesty, it's like his expertise in the high performance area of rugby seems to be directly linked to probably the most important group of players in Canada right now, which is those, under 20, under 18 level teams, those academy level teams, because these are going to be the players that are going to, if Rugby Canada is at a low point right now, these are going to be the guys that are going to be responsible for the rise back up the world rankings and the rise back up to prominence within world rugby for Rugby Canada, right? It's I think it kind of the move to me, it kind of ties back into a little bit of the conversation we had with Corey Hector last week, when he was talking about being with, I can't remember if it was the U18 or U20 team, but he was with one of those teams when Canada lost to Chile and was officially eliminated from the World Cup. And, the message that the players in that locker room and that the coaches were trying to, the coaches were sending was, that they're going to be the players that, fix this. Basically, they're going to be the players that get to return Rugby Canada to like that former, the former glory that it once was, being like, like I said, it was just in 2011 that they were on the verge of being a top 10 nation in the world, right? And like restoring Rugby Canada to that, it's a lot of that responsibility is going to come on the under 20 age group and stuff right now as they older, as we look to maybe, I guess, probably build to that World Cup that's going to be in the United States in just under a decade now. So like I think like that's the most important age group right now. That's the most important group that needs to be developed. So getting a full high performance director that kind of seems to specialize in that age group, I think is a really good move. The other thing, the just surface level thing that I like about this too is that it's nice to see a tangible piece of evidence of Rugby Canada changing something. It's been, it's been a while. Obviously, the women's team has had success, but it's been a while since the men's team has failed to qualify for the World Cup. And we've watched other teams, other nations that have failed to qualify for the World Cup after Canada, who were really swift and made very quick changes. Where Rugby Canada seems to be taking a little bit longer to go through that process. But it's nice to see that you're bringing in somebody that is a high performance director. And in all honesty, usually a thing that happens is like if you like you see it with other sports, you bring in new GMs, new high performance directors, directors of sport, whatever you want to call them in the nomenclature of your organization. Usually that means changes to staff follow because they take the time to evaluate that, what's working, what's not working, and then they start to, bring in their own guys and their own people and implement their own, start trying to implement and create their own culture and stuff, right? So
Yeah.
Nathan Bombrey is making a big hiring for somebody in the position of high performance director. I think just in general is a positive step, and I like the fact that the resume seems to be kind of geared toward what might be the most important generation of Canadian rugby players we have right now for all four of the you know top level national teams.
Yeah. So it was actually announced that Rugby Canada released their annual report
Mhm.
of what they've done over the year. And in that report included a high performance review
Again,
appendix, which basically says they remember the high performance review originally came out March 2022.
yeah.
So this appendix includes a May 2022 update and a March 2023 update. And it was in this update that they mentioned the hiring of the um, high performance director. But there's a few other things I just want to mention that have come out. So the director of governance and regulations has been hired in January of 2023. There has been a review of the high performance governance areas that's begun. I think it's still ongoing. A permanent HR manager was hired in November of 2022.
That's good.
Uh, membership revenue uses was reported back in December 2022.
Yeah.
Saying 20 a lot of times. And so the thing when it comes to the high performance director being distinct from other roles is that EPP Global was retained to conduct the global search back in December. 5 candidates were shortlisted with interviews conducted in February. The candidate was appointed subject to contracts back in March. So Stephen's been basically known within the organization March and has had like 3 months to prepare to start in June. Other things in terms of strategy is that a men's pathway manager has been hired, a Maple Leaf Academy manager has been hired, the restart of women's and men's age grade rugby, and it also says further alignment work will be needed under the new high performance director. So for people who have been saying that, they've just been looking, they've done the high performance review and then they've just like left it to the side and been like, yeah, fine, whatever, who cares? There is actual um, you know, uh, there
They're
is
making changes.
there's an actual record
Yeah.
there showing what the development
It's
is,
yeah.
and I appreciate that it's a lot of these things say is like still ongoing, such as like getting the culture established of what it means to be a high performance athlete,
Culture
and
skills.
ending and even things like optimizing for shifting Rugby Canada's geographical presence. That includes the Pacific Four Series games in Ottawa, the Paris 2024 Olympic qualifier in Langford, and Langford's continued discussions with the future of the National Training Centre. The CEO is Nathan Bromvis has been engaging with Quebec, BC, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta provincial rugby. continuing to explore future events across the provinces, and discussions are open around potential of future regional training hubs. So, obviously, the main focus here is that Stephen Aboud has been hired as a high performance director. But if you do get the chance to go and read that Rugby Canada annual report and the appendix, you can see the changes that are being made. Remember, that this high performance review wasn't just of the Women's World Cup or the men's failure to qualify for the World Cup in France. It highlighted issues that have been prevalent in the organization for a long time. These things aren't going to be resolved in a year, but the progress is being made, and it's just a case of patience for those wanting to see change and the ability to be a part of the change when that opportunity arises. Right. Okay, we're getting towards the end of the podcast now, and we have round 14 of Major League Rugby coming up. So the first game will be Toronto versus DC. Derek, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you're not picking DC.
No, I mean, whether we're talking like comic books or rugby, DC is usually second best. So it's it comes
but
up.
Animated films, that's a totally different.
Oh, that's a different conversation. Yeah, that the animated, the Justice League cartoon is on Netflix again now, by the way. So that's that can get
that's something you can watch while you're waiting for the rugby game to happen.
Exactly.
After you finish listening to the podcast, obviously.
No, you're right. There is one realm where DC is triumphant, but
all right. Okay. All right. And after their performance this past week, I think there's a lot to be said, and hopefully Toronto can get that home win under their belt.
Yeah.
Okay, next up we have Atlanta versus Dallas, and I think Atlanta will be kicking themselves. They'll be out for revenge. I'm going to be picking Atlanta for this run.
Yeah, same.
Okay. All right, next up we have Utah versus Houston. Utah currently in 4th in the West, Houston in 3rd. Who do you have, Derek?
Oh, you know what? I think it's a home game. Utah really needs this. This is a huge game for Utah. So I'm gonna back Utah.
I know that Utah needs this, but I also know that Houston are equally looking to secure that playoff spot, and they'll be wanting to have as wide a berth from Utah as possible. So I'm going to go with Houston, so that we mix it up.
It might be the biggest game of the weekend, actually.
Yes, well, it certainly seems the closest anticipated, because next up we have Seattle versus Chicago.
It's Seattle. Why are we don't even need to talk about this one.
Yeah, and the final game is New England versus NOLA.
And Sam, we don't need to talk about this one.
All right, so there we have it. Those 5 games this weekend. Coming up first on Thursday is Toronto versus DC, and then on Saturday and Sunday it is Atlanta versus Dallas, Utah versus Houston, Seattle versus Chicago, and New England versus NOLA. And you can watch the Arrows game on TSN, tsn.ca, and TSN Plus, and you can also other MLR games on the Rugby Network. Across the pond in Europe, we have the final round of the Men's World 7 Series. That will be held in London. That is available on CBC and CBC Gem. And we also have the finals of the Champions and Challenge Cup, and that is available on epcrugby.tv. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out more, as well as our written pieces on our website, rougerugby.ca. We will also find our podcast on Spotify, S4P, and Apple Podcasts. We also have a YouTube channel at the Rouge Rugby with episodes of the podcast, as well as our black box interviews with players and coaches. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay up to date with all the videos. We are also available across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all at the Rouge Rugby. But Derek, where can the fine people find you?
At Reset the Jet across all social media platforms.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode. Derek, thank you for joining me, and thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we focus on real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.